Hi there, and welcome once again to Peninsula Players Presents, the history of Peninsula Players Theatre. And I'm here with a dear Audra today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Greg.
Excellent, excellent. And last episode, we talked about what we called the stalwarts of the 60s, and we're going to continue with that today. We're going to talk about six people, and these are people who defined what the 1960s at the Players was. These were people who were veterans who were around for a number of seasons. And I wanted to share a quote with you from our 50th anniversary booklet that Jim McKenzie said uh, about why people come back all the time. And I think we all are aware of the feelings that this speaks of. And he says, quote, one season at the Players is exciting, but two seasons in succession leave an indelible mark on the soul, a lifelong yearning to try just one more season. We worked, ate, walked, breathed, laughed, slept, and dreamt theater in a garden until it became a part of each of us. We learned to live life to its absolute saturation point, to the peaks of emotion, love, adventure, accomplishment, ability, and endurance. We expected to be hospitalized with exhaustion towards the end of every summer. We still do. Sound familiar, audience?
It does. And how they did a show a week. That's the part where I go, oh no.
Yeah, I think they were younger.
Yeah, okay. Okay. We'll go with that.
So we're going to talk about six more people today that defined the 1960s at the Players. And we're going to start with Charles Lycar, who was there from 1964 to 1972.
He was, and he started as an apprentice, as an intern. And he was going to the Goodman School of Drama, where he earned his bachelor's degree and master's degree in directing. So his first season, he was on stage and he had a few parts and then doing backstage stuff, everything that an intern would do. And he just kept coming back and coming back. And
And he went from an intern apprentice to stage manager in 1966 to artistic director in 1969 and stayed on until 72. But when he was a young kid, he was
he
interesting.
he liked to perform magic acts for his neighbors, so he would put up a little short little magic show and entertain the neighborhood. And so he was always interested in directing and performing and having an audience.
I was
And
never that talented. The best I could do was play.
I didn't. I could talk to the squirrels. I could perform for the squirrels.
I
I
could play
didn't have
kick the
neighbors.
can. So in those years, he was quite involved. And in 1967, he was stage manager on Broadway.
He was, and it was a show with um, that was leading up to it, but it never got to open. So he got to go through the rehearsal processes and everything, but unfortunately, the show never saw an opening night.
Yes, and
Um,
I don't think it remained in the annals of theater plays that are done often. It was called The Freaking Out of Stephanie Blake, and it starred Jean Arthur, but she collapsed during previews.
she did, and so it was unfortunate that he didn't get to see that, but he got through most of the process, so
Mhm.
that was exciting. And he also stage managed and directed shows on tour, and through with Jim Mackenzie's some of his other venues that he was able to stage manage and work there, and stage managed across the country at other venues. And then eventually, at the Peninsula Players, he directed more than 20 plays.
Mm.
And I wanted to make sure that Love was one of those. So when we talked previously about a production that had to be remounted within 24 hours because of an actor's injury, it was Charles who was directing, not Carl Benson, that I had mentioned earlier. So
Thank you for
yeah,
saying
yeah.
that. And he also acted.
He did. He acted in 8 shows, including the Fantastics and quite a few other plays, and also across the country. So he's also a performer in Chicago and has performed at several venues there, as well as Dinner Theater in Rockford, Illinois, that was founded. He became the first resident director there as well. And that was the Playhouse in town. And so
And that
just
was in 1969, while he
great.
was still working at the Players.
Hmm.
And also in 1969, he directed and stage managed a tour of black comedy.
Right, which was the show that why I brought it up, because Black Comedy was the show that they were hoping to do, but that was the one that the actor got injured in. So they never got to do that at Peninsula Players, but he got the chance to direct it and take it on tour. And that included performances from California to across the country.
And that was with Jan Sterling,
Mm,
right?
yes.
And as you said, he performed in lots of other theaters around Chicago and in Augusta, Michigan at the Barn
Mhm.
Theater. And in 87, he created and distributed new plays and playwrights.
Yes, this is at the time when desktop publishing, or your ability to self-generate information, was available. And he had a computer, and he decided he wanted to just inform other playwrights. In an interview that he had done, he said, "I'm also trying to show young or evolving playwrights that people like David Mamet and Michael Weller are not gods. They are just people like us, and I hope to inform and inspire." So it was a 4 to 6 page newsletter that he distributed for free. And there was a donor and a sponsor who, after he started it, gave him a little startup money to continue the project for a while. But it had articles and listings of new works and new plays. And it was just a nice little information guide before the age of blogging. So
Mhm.
prior to what you could do now, he was helping to
Sort
inspire other
of
playwrights.
a prehistoric blogger.
Yes.
And in 2001, he created and performed a show, A Cozy Evening with George Bernard Shaw, or The Trick of the GBS.
Yes. And I believe it was Jeff nominated too. It was one of
Oh.
the Jeff referred, but he performed in several venues.
And so next, we wanted to talk about Dunya Rathbone, one of Caroline and Rodion Rathbone's daughters, the Caroline being the founder of the
Mm.
theater. And of course, she was involved with the theater from the get-go.
Yes.
But
She
in
was.
Yeah, but in the 60s, she came back.
She did. She was back as a performer, and it was continuing some of her training. So if you followed along with us, you've known that Caroline and Rodion, early in their marriage, traveled a lot because of Rodion's job. So they were overseas in Europe. And when Dunya was 3, she saw a ballet for the first time in Italy and said, "I want to be a ballerina." And that was her ambition. And finally, at the age 11, they started letting giving her dance lessons. So she started training to be a ballerina. And that was her ambition and goal. And she had even earned a scholarship to attend.
The Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo.
Thank you. Yes, that was it. And so she did this training, and she also wanted to be a performer. So she was able to got cast in a couple of dancing shows, ballet ballads off of an off Broadway production. And then she also was a dancer in the Broadway production of Little Me with Sid Caesar.
Hmm.
And so she was making the rounds and doing what young aspiring talent does, auditioning and
Hmm.
all of that, and then attending Peninsula Players. And then in the middle of it, she took a break and sort of had a little bit of a midlife crisis at the age of 22. She wasn't sure if that's what she wanted to do. Um, Training to be a ballerina is very grueling and long, hard hours.
Sure.
And one of the side jobs that some people do when they're not auditioning is wait tables. And well, she was in Kansas City, and that's what she did. She got a job working and serving at a silver service restaurant. So Real.
But I wanted to say also, like, what the heck was she doing in Kansas City? And you discovered that her parents, Caroline and Rodian, had moved to Merriam, just outside Kansas City.
Just, yeah, for that little bit. I think Rodian had maybe retired from flying, being a navigator, so they were there.
Hmm.
And so Dunya was living with mom and dad and doing this silver service. She was really learning using her poise as a ballerina, got her the job because she was really confident, and her stage presentation and presenting the silver service, felt she was performing and she enjoyed it. So she was learning the little tricks of the trade and how to present a the thing that sets on fire.
Flambe.
Thank you.
Yes. Not the customer.
Right now. Oh, yeah, exactly. She wouldn't set them on fire. But just all of that. And she was really enjoying it. So she continued, and this was in 1967. So
Hmm.
she'd come back and perform at Peninsula Players and was in several shows while she was there. And then she'd continue this training. Eventually, Rodian gets hired by an air company in Saudi Arabia to train their pilots. And so he and Caroline moved to Arabia, and Dunya goes with them and starts a little preparing meals for people on these flights. And then while she's there, she's bouncing back and forth between Arabia doing this, learning the spices, to London's cordon bleu. So she
Paris is.
started, I think it was London's, if I
Oh,
read it.
really? Okay.
Yeah, there was a London variant. So, but there is one in Paris. But
Interesting.
and so she was bouncing back and forth there, took some of those classes.
Uh-huh.
She ends up back in New York, working in different kitchens and catering, and eventually meets her husband and future husband, and they start their own catering company
Hmm.
called Remember Basil
Huh.
after her grandfather and
Basil Rathbone.
Basil Rathbone. And she worked it's just amazing. And she gets to work for all of these exciting different private events. She served breakfast at the Guggenheim Museum for an event, and 400 people. At Radio City Music Hall. So she did get to perform at Radio City Music Hall, but not as a dancer, as a chef
I see.
for a donor event.
And that was the first time that had happened there,
It
right?
was, yes, that was the first time any type of event was ever on that stage for
Like
such a
that.
thing. Yep.
Yeah. So her career, her life turned in a whole new direction.
It did, but it was still a performance. And it was interviewed another time, and she said, chefs are really theatrical. So she got to use her stage training, and especially when she was working on Tamar, it was an off-Broadway show in
Mhm.
New York that was held in a building. And so this is in the late 80s, and it was an event. Patrons would buy a ticket, and they would move from room to room in the structure that was designed to be an Italian villa. And so they would like be witnessing this soap opera that was going on. And in the background, Dunya and her catering team were setting up buffet tables all quietly, and all had to be done within minutes.
Mm.
People would eat, and then within 2 minutes they'd have to strike and take it down. And Dunya said she used her theatrical training to remember how to do a stage shift and
Yes,
make all of that
and
happen.
as I told you, I had been watching a documentary about Audrey Hepburn, and Audrey Hepburn started as a ballet dancer,
Mhm.
and it reminded me so much of Dunya, both in looks and the way she carried
Mhm.
herself, very elegant. And so another person we wanted to talk about was Laureen Vazov, who was, as you described, a regular Wisconsin gal.
Yes, she was. She was raised near Milwaukee, and her love of theater started as a youth as well. And she was very involved in the community theaters in the area, including those in Wauwatosa and the Sunset
Waukesha.
Playhouse and Waukesha and Brookfield. So she just slowly was working her way up.
Hmm.
She did attend some training programs in Illinois and I think Iowa. So she did go to college and do some of that. And then she returned to Wisconsin and got cast in several shows with Milwaukee Rep and several other theater companies in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And while she was with Peninsula Players, she was there for several seasons, and I
From
believe was in about 20, had 20 different roles
and
throughout
this
her
was
time.
1965 to 1968, a
Hmm.
chunk of that decade.
And so she included playing some royalty. She got to be a queen in The Lion in Winter and in Beckett. And she got to repeat that role
The one in
late
Beckett
later on in Beckett at another theater company.
in
And
Chicago,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And one of the highlights that she did one season was when we did Wait Until Dark. Her daughter was in the show with her. So her daughter Diane got to be with her that season. And there's a small part for a young juvenile in that production. And so Lorraine and her daughter were able to perform together, which was it's kind of nice for a family to be able to do that.
Indeed, indeed it is. And then like sort of like Dunya, she moved to New York in 68, as
Mm-hmm.
I think you said, and she tried that for a little bit.
She did, and I think just found it it's a little different. So she was featured in this little article in the Milwaukee paper about being out there, and but she gave it a shot, and then eventually she moves to California,
Hmm.
and
And
just
like Dunya, her life sort of takes a different, goes on a different track.
it does. And she is directing, she's writing, she's performing, and she also eventually founds her own workshop school
Mhm.
and teaches and continues to teach and participate in all of these playwriting workshops and co-directs, continuing to work in television and films. And her list of credits is pretty amazing, from Knight Rider to Matlock to um, NYPD Blue towards the end of that series as well. She was cast as mothers a lot. And in another network program that came out was Rebel, which was taking place where Valerie Mays, our musical director, was teaching for a
Oh,
while.
at Elon.
Elon, that's it. I didn't have the name
Uh-huh.
right. So, but
Yeah.
that's where the setting of this young soap opera was, and she was playing the mom of one of the characters
Oh,
in there.
interesting.
So, yeah.
And the studio she found was called the Theater Group Studio, and workshop studio, and that's still going on. And her daughter is running it
Yeah.
now, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, and she also wrote a book called Changing Circumstances, an Acting Manual with 24 Scenes in 2000, which is still out there
Hmm.
and being used in training.
It is. So, just it is exciting to see all the different directions.
That people, yes, go on. Indeed, I've just stayed with theater. That's all I can do. I'm not as talented as these other people. And another actress that passed through the theater from 64 to 68 and in 1975, so
Mm-hmm.
she was with us for 6 seasons, was Lynn Billick.
Yes, and Lynn started fresh out of college as well. So she joined Peninsula Players as what we would call one of the ingenue actresses, and playing all of the young parts and young girls. So the young princess in Lion in Winter, and the young ladies in Hay Fever and some other shows.
And
And
you also said that she earned her equity card at the Players.
she did. She eventually then earned her equity card, and um, after graduating from the University of Denver, and then she was touring. So one of the touring shows, the Impossible Years, that involved Lynn playing one of the younger kids. Jean Bolin was the gym teacher, as we
Mhm.
discussed during hers. And at some points on some of the tour routes, Carl Benson, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, was also part of those productions. So it was quite the reunion tour for all of them.
No,
Um,
but Jose Ferrer wasn't in it.
Jose, no, Jose
Oh,
wasn't,
so we
unfortunately.
have no idea what he's doing.
Yes, but Lynn, she continued stage work. She was performing a little bit all over the country. She performed in Chicago in several shows. She continued her training there and eventually got some radio work on WBEZ
Hmm.
FM. And she also met her future husband, Joey Edmonds, who
This
was
this is interesting because again, this is another career in life that took a whole new direction.
took a whole new direction when she went Joey and fell in love. Joey at the time was an entertainer who was in a comedy team called Edmonds and Curly, and they're a comedy duo. But
And
Joey
you
was
have to
also
say that he was from where he was from and what he
yes,
studied to be.
he did. He was going to school at UW Oshkosh. He was originally from Oshkosh, and he was going to nursing school to be an anesthesiologist. And he graduated with that, but he never used that degree because the comedy team was being very successful. And after he and Lynn got married in 1969, they moved to New York because the comedy team was performing at the Copacabana. And they had television appearances on the Johnny Carson show and Mike Douglas show throughout their time. And they became one of the first comedy duos to solely perform the college circuit.
Hmm.
And so it really helped Joey and Lynn have a home life because they could schedule their dates so that he could be home and
Mhm.
help with the family. And eventually they moved to California because of that. They really want to sustain a family. And rather than going on the road all the time, Joey starts his own agency that Lynn helps at, the Joey Edmonds Agency, and helps other young startup comics book college dates across the circuit. And he was so successful at it that the National Association of Student Activity Boards gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award
Hmm.
for
And Lynn continued to work with him,
and
and they wrote things together too, didn't
they
they?
did. She has a wonderful sense of humor, just like Joey, and she wrote her own book based upon observations of people as being a soccer mom and going to the grocery store. And
And this was called "I Only Have Trouble with People." Dot dot dot, which came out in 2008, which you can get.
you could still get, or you can get the companion books of Joey's that are like on claustrophobia and other things. They went on a book tour a few years ago in the 80s and stopped in Oshkosh. So,
And so they're still around.
yep.
Indeed.
Lynn is. Joey passed away.
I see. And then the last two people we wanted to talk about were, in my estimation, they were characters for
Yes.
sure in many, many different ways.
Yes.
And first was Carl Benson, who was at the Players from between 1965 and 1989, which was a good long time,
And
which stretched into my time there.
right, yes, and just the longevity. And there was a quote I remember from him that said he didn't really start getting work until he got older. It was like once he like reached past 45 or so, that's when he found himself like having to turn down work. Like that's when more things were coming
But
his
he had a
way.
very, I mean, from the get-go, from birth, he had a very interesting life.
He did, and it all shaped who he was. And by the time Carl was 2, his parents had passed away and was passed around from family members for a little while who took care of him until he was placed in an orphanage. At some point, a family from Texas did adopt him, but by the time he reached the age of 14, he ran away. He just ran away to California, and this is where his adventures begin
Indeed.
because he got cast by Cecil B. DeMille and was in the film The Sign of the Cross at the age of 14. I was just to see the name Cecil B. DeMille, I was like, oh my gosh, I know in another video we mentioned Mae West, but I was like, these two iconic film legends, and
Indeed.
Carl's associated with them.
Yeah.
And so Carl stays in California for a bit, and a minister takes him in and he lives with him until he graduates from high school. He's kind of exploring the world and does get a scholarship to a Texas uh, university to play football.
Mhm.
And but I'm not sure he ever graduates. He continues to explore. He was a cowboy for a while. He was a lumberjack. He's driven taxi cabs. He has been a bartender. He's done all of these different things. And eventually he does end up in New York, and he does perform with Mae West on Broadway and traveled with her another time for Diamond Lil.
And I think that Mae West show was called Catherine Was Great.
Catherine, well, yes.
But earlier, you had a quote that where Carl talked about how important theater was to him as a teen.
It was, and theater was very important. He said it was very important and helped develop who he was, because he didn't know who he was. And do you have it in
Yeah,
front of you? What, please?
yeah. And what he said was, when you don't know who you are, theater is great because you're anything some playwright has written up. I didn't know who I was, and I could be anything in the theater.
And I think that's so important even today. There's a lot of youth out there who don't know who they are, and the opportunity for them to explore that, I think, is great. And even for adults
And
to
explored,
do that.
and also the theater is very much a family,
Mm-hmm.
very much so, and that provides a lot. So he did a lot of different stuff. I mean, carnival worker, photographer's assistant, and I think you said he felt that this was a chance for him to observe life, to watch people, behavior.
Right. And it really trained him. That was his training for the
Mhm.
stage. And even being a photographer's assistant left him with a lifelong passion and hobby for photography. Quite a the few publicity photos that were taken by Carl and
Mhm.
processed and so forth for the theater. And he was wrote poetry, he dabbled in a little bit of everything, and was just a real renaissance man in his interests. And it was said that he had done everything in entertainment, from burlesque to Broadway, from legitimate stage to films to commercials and television roles. He's numerous TV roles, commercials, and other films that he's been in, and writes poetry. And he was also listed as a playwright, but we couldn't find any of the plays as published. So
Yes, he wrote one apparently called The Money Saucer, and I would love to find out something about that because I don't want to know what that title means.
Brand, yes, exactly.
But there was he was at one time on tour, and we'll talk about the
Mhm,
price in a second. In a New Orleans paper in 1970, there was an article about him,
mhm,
and this struck me because it was sort of talked about him, what he was like as a character.
mm.
And the article said a little bit, Benson was born in San Francisco, but he doesn't have a permanent address. And he quotes him as saying, I have a house car stashed in Hollywood, and I called New York my home for 19 years. I vote in El Paso, so I guess I'm a citizen of the country. So yes, so he was all over the place, a Renaissance sort of person.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just all over. And that's part of that is when we get to the price that he got to tour in 1970 was Carl being Carl. The actors who performed in that production were hand selected by the playwright Arthur Miller. So there was a casting process, but Arthur had the final say so. And so Carl was going to rehearsals, and about the third day of rehearsal, he stopped at the neighborhood pub afterwards, and he's at the bar having a beverage, and a gentleman comes and sits by next to him, and they just start talking, and Carl starts talking about his life and everything, and says, yeah, I'm up for a part here, but I don't know if I'm going to get it. I've got to get approval. And the guy goes, well, don't worry about it. You sound just like the character, so you're going to be fine. You're in it. I'm the playwright.
Oh,
And that's how he met Arthur Miller.
Nicole. Oh, I wish I could get cast in something like that easily. And so that show meant a lot to him, in
It
many.
did, and the company that it was with weren't, the other actor he was with ended up on a soap opera, Another World, for a while, and that production was about two brothers and meeting the Price is about two brothers clearing up their mother's things after she passes, and the older brother making sacrifices so the younger one can go to school, and never having really had much interaction with each other. And that almost reflects a little bit of Carl's life, because as a child being adopted, he didn't meet his other siblings until later in life, and discovering that one of his siblings was adopted by a much more wealthier family and had a totally different life than he did. So it really did mirror Carl's life. And Carl also was awarded the Straw Hat Award for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Walter in The Price for that year while it was on tour.
And I think he said, was quoted as saying it was probably the peak experience of in his career.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
he did a ton of things, and as I said, I was happy to be able to work with him in A Walk in the Woods in 1989 at the
Mm-hmm.
Players.
Mm-hmm.
And he's gone now, but he left quite an impression on the theater
He
and
did.
on the people he dealt with.
He did.
And the last person we wanted to talk about, another character, was Dennis Kennedy, who was at the theater for 20 years, 20 like from 1966 to 1986.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these people, I think some of our audience members will remember. So and if you have any information about any of them or stories, pass them on to us.
Yes, exactly. And Dennis was also a graduate of the Goodman School of Drama. And while he was with the Players, was the time when a lot of the Neil Simon shows were being produced. And Dennis was in, I think, every single one of them that the theater did. And
And
also
Tim
in other.
McKenzie had a good relationship with Neil Simon at the
Mm,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there was just quite a few things, and Dennis was in all these parts. He was in the show that had to be done within 24 hours, and was just a real character on and off the stage. Dennis was in about 87 shows at Peninsula Players, and really well remembered for some of those. He was in several shows with Gene and Bob, Gene Sincere and Bob Thompson, and a, just a variety of shows. He met his wife, future wife, while he was performing at another theater, and just very charismatic in his own way.
Oh, yeah, well, indeed, a character. And Vicky was his wife,
Mhm.
and she was at the Players also.
Yes, and they met while performing The Christmas Carol at the Ramada Children's Theater in Dolton, Illinois.
And Dennis was Scrooge, and Vicky was Christmas Past.
Yes,
Was meant
yeah,
to be.
exactly. And Vicky also had a passion for one of his favorite pastimes, and so they both became bleacher bums for the Chicago Cubs. So Dennis was a real Cubs fan and was given the title drama coach by the other fans in that bleacher section, because he would help lead the chants um, for the opposing teams.
Yes, and
So he and Ralph Foodie would get into very interesting conversations between the Cubs and the Sox in the dining hall.
yes, he was very passionate
He was so passionate that eventually he even had his own radio show called Denny's Den, where he had conversations about baseball and whatever else he wanted to talk about.
Was that up in Door County or
That was in Chicago.
Chicago? Oh, okay.
Okay. Hmm.
And he was also passionate about the Civil War. I guess he was apparently a Civil War buff.
He was, yes. He had some uniforms and everything. And I think once insisted that the interns salute his cat as they passed.
and uh, and he did a bunch of shows. Well, one of the shows at the Players was Sly Fox in '78, which was extended to a 3-week run, which was the first time that had happened. And again, he worked in Chicago. He was at the Goodman. He was Fezziwig in Christmas Carol for at least a couple productions with Bill Norris as Scrooge. And he also did interesting Pace Bus commercials.
He did around the time 1994. He and another actor were doing these commercials, and I guess Dennis had like a Yiddish accent while doing it, and they're trying to get to the bus. And is that if they stop at a red light, does that mean it's a bus stop? So If anybody remembers those, that
And funnily enough, he did that commercial right after he did The Importance of Being Earnest
mhm,
at Court Theater, which I actually saw.
mhm,
And I actually once worked with Dennis, who you had mentioned, Gene Sincere and Bob Thompson.
mhm,
And at Northlight, they did On Golden Pond with Gene and
mhm,
Bob and Dennis. And
mhm.
I replaced Monty Davis in it. So I did have one chance to work with
Yeah.
him.
And Dennis was all over the country. He performed at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. He was a member of the Indiana Repertory Theater for a few seasons with Vicky. He performed at the American Conservatory in California and just all over. So he was a, you know, even though he would say, I'm a star in Fish Creek, he performed all over.
Indeed.
And
Indeed. And but before we leave Dennis, though, there were a couple stories I'd love you to tell about his phone call to the Pope.
there was at some point, I don't know why, but Dennis wanted to talk to the Pope. And so he's in the lodge, and this is at a time frame where you don't have cell phones yet. And so he's in the lodge, and he places a phone call to the Vatican, and just says, "This is Mr. Kennedy of the United States. I have an important question for the Pope. Can oh, well, he's not available right now. Can we call you back? Okay, yeah. Here's my phone number." And then he goes off somewhere and forgets that he makes the phone call, and the phone starts ringing hours later, maybe even days. And one of the interns in the lodge picks up the phone, and it's the Vatican for Mr. Kennedy. And
My goodness.
they couldn't find him to
Oh,
talk
well.
to
Well, he never got to have that conversation.
him.
And also he had bagpipes.
He had bagpipes. There was an article I was reading in for the future season that the players hosted a choir concert that was going to be held. And unbeknownst to everybody, Dennis dresses in this full regalia, including bagpipes, and does a pre-show entertainment for the audience before the choir starts.
In a
His
kilt.
and a kilt, and just performs. And that was Dennis. He had a spirit and joy all to himself.
Indeed. And we will leave the 60s with Dennis. And at this point, also, we're going to take a bit of a break in our history interviews and do a little hiatus for a couple reasons. One is that as we go further
Mhm.
into getting researching the upcoming decades, well, Audie, you can speak about that.
Yeah, I just it's we've caught up to the UW library system. So in during this time of COVID, they've been helping, since they're storing our archives, to get me information digitally, and I'm we're caught up. So they've got to get caught up so I can get caught up. So
Yes, and indeed, also at the same time, we're working very hard at seeing what we can do in terms of reopening this season, and hopefully we will get something on this year. So, Audie, it's been another pleasure being with
oh,
you. Thanks. We
thanks,
got
Greg.
up to 1970.
Yay.
So that's from 1935 to 1970. A lot happened.
A lot happened, and nobody knew till now. We're excited and happy to have shared it.
We are. And thank you for being with us. And we'll keep you posted about when we're next on board. So, again, thanks, Audie.
Thanks, Greg.
And we will see you next time, whenever that is. Take care.